The air inside the massive soundstage felt heavy and recycled, circulating endlessly through large vents that hummed a low, constant B-flat. It was the kind of atmosphere that usually made people feel sleepy after lunch, but today, the energy was brittle. Everyone on the crew was moving a little faster, trying to wrap up the sequence before the sun went down and the natural light outside faded completely. Keanu stood near the center of the set. He was wearing his familiar black coat, the one that looked heavy and restrictive, yet he moved in it like it was a second skin. His face was calm, focused. He had done this 1,000 times before. The scene was simple. There were no explosions, no gunfire, and no speeding cars. It was just him, a quiet moment of transition. The script called for him to stand by a concrete pillar, look at a digital device in his hand, and then smoothly lower his body into a defensive crouch, ready for whatever came next. The director called for action from his chair behind the monitors. The blurry figures of the camera crew tracked the actor's movement. Keanu lifted his head. His eyes were sharp, locking onto a point in the distance that only he could see. He took a breath, his chest expanding slightly against the tight fabric of his shirt. Then he began to lower himself. It happened in slow motion, though in reality it took only a second. There was no gasp of pain, no grabbing at his chest, and no cry for help. It was as if someone had suddenly reached inside him and flipped a switch to the off position. His knees simply buckled. Instead of the controlled, fluid crouch they were expecting, his body went limp. He folded in on himself, sliding down the rough surface of the concrete pillar until he hit the floor with a dull thud that was louder than it should have been in the quiet studio. For a moment, nobody moved. The camera kept rolling, the red light on top blinking accusingly. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library. It was a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. The actors in the scene with him froze, confused, thinking it might be a new improvisation, a trick to catch them off guard. "Cut," someone whispered, but it sounded more like a question than a command. Then the reality of what they were seeing hit the first assistant director. He saw the way Keanu's head lolled unnaturally against his shoulder, the way his limbs were splayed on the floor like a discarded marionette. "Cut. Cut, cut, cut," the director's voice cracked, shattering the stillness. He was out of his chair before he even finished speaking, sprinting toward the set. "Medic. We need a medic in here now." The crew exploded into motion. People who had been standing still just seconds ago were suddenly running, dropping equipment and clipboards. A young woman holding a boom mic stepped back, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. The stunt coordinator, a big man who usually treated injuries like paper cuts, dropped to his knees beside Keanu. He tapped the actor's face gently, then a little harder. "Keanu. Hey, can you hear me?" There was no response. His eyes were half open, staring at nothing. The color was draining from his face, turning his skin a shade of gray that matched the concrete floor. The sound of heavy boots pounding against the ground echoed through the studio as the medical team arrived, pushing through the crowd of onlookers. They moved with efficient, practiced speed. One checked his pulse while another shone a light into his eyes. The conversations around them faded into a white noise of worry. It felt wrong to see him like this. This was a man who was known for jumping off skyscrapers, for surviving bus explosions, for fighting through impossible odds in movies. Seeing him felled by something unseen on a quiet Tuesday afternoon felt like a violation of the natural order. "He's breathing," one of the medics said loudly, sounding relieved but serious. "His pulse is weak, but he's stable. We need to get him to the truck. Now." They worked quickly to lift him onto the stretcher. As they strapped him in, the director stood by, helplessly clutching a headset. He looked at the crew, seeing his own fear reflected in all their faces. This wasn't just an actor. This was the heart of their set. He was the guy who bought breakfast for everyone, who remembered names, who stayed late to sign autographs for the cleaning staff. Seeing him broken was terrifying. They wheeled him out of the set area. The path to the exit was lined with people standing in silence, parting like the sea to let the medics through. The large metal sliding doors that led to the parking lot were cranked open manually by a grip, the metal rattling loudly in the quiet air. The brightness of the afternoon sunlight flooded the dark studio for a moment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the beam of light before the stretcher disappeared into it. Once the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle drove away, the soundstage felt empty. It was a massive building, filled with millions of dollars worth of equipment and dozens of people, but it felt like a ghost town. No one knew what to do. Should they keep filming? Should they go home? The mood had shifted from professional efficiency to deep personal anxiety. The director walked back to the monitors, his shoulders slumped. He looked at the frozen image on the screen, Keanu just seconds before he fell, looking strong and invincible. It felt like a lifetime ago. In the parking lot outside, the sky was a clear, unmoving blue. There was no storm, no wind to blame for what happened. It was just a normal day that had turned upside down. The crew members began to drift outside, needing fresh air, pulling out their cell phones. The news would travel fast. It always did. Rumors would start spinning before the hour was up. Some would say it was a heart attack. Others would say it was exhaustion. A few might whisper about something darker, a hidden illness that had been kept secret. The truth was locked inside that ambulance, speeding toward the hospital. But for the people left behind in the quiet, dust-filled studio, the only thing that mattered was the sinking feeling in their stomachs. They had just watched their hero fall, and they didn't know if he would get back up this time. The fear was palpable, sticking to the back of their throats, tasting metallic and cold. They stood in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, looking toward the road where the ambulance had vanished. Waiting for news that felt like it would never come, the hospital waiting area was painted a color that can only be described as hopeless beige. It was a place where time seemed to stop, trapped between the pale walls and the tiled floor. The air smelled strongly of antiseptic cleaner, mixed with the faint, bitter scent of stale coffee from a vending machine in the corner. There was no window to the outside world in this specific hallway, which made it feel like a bubble separated from the rest of the city. A group of about 10 people sat in the molded plastic chairs, arranged in a loose circle. They were an odd mix, some dressed in dark, expensive suits, and others wearing jeans and t-shirts covered in dust from the movie set. They were bound together by one thing: worry. They were the core team, the people who had been with him through years of filming and stunts. But today, they felt helpless. The stunt coordinator, a man with broad shoulders and weather-beaten skin, sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He was usually the guy who joked around, the one who made everyone laugh when things got tough. But right now, he wasn't smiling. He kept replaying the scene in his head. He had seen Keanu take hits before. He had seen him jump off buildings and crash motorcycles, but this was different. There was no impact, no force, just nothing. That was what scared him the most. Across from him sat the young production assistant. She was clutching a paper cup like it was a lifeline. Her knuckles were white. She looked up at the clock on the wall. The second hand seemed to be moving slower than normal. It ticked loudly, cutting through the silence. Tick, tick, tick. "It's been 2 hours," she whispered, her voice trembling. The coordinator looked up, his eyes tired. "Medical tests take time, kid. They have to be sure." "But he looked so pale," she said, a tear escaping and rolling down her cheek. "He just collapsed. One minute he was there, and the next, he was gone." The older man sighed and shifted in his chair. The plastic creaked under his weight. He knew what she was feeling. But he also carried a heavier weight. He knew the history. He remembered the dark days of the past. He knew that Keanu's life hadn't been an easy one. It seemed like every time the world thought he was happy, something came along to break him. The coordinator thought about the years that had passed. He thought about the babies who were lost too soon, and the love of his life who was taken from him. The world often painted Keanu as the sad, lonely man, but the people in this room knew the truth. He wasn't sad, he was strong. He had a heart that kept beating despite the cracks. But how much can one heart take? That was the question running through everyone's mind. Was this the breaking point? Had the universe finally asked too much of him? A man in a suit stood up and paced toward the far end of the hall. There was a glass partition there, looking out into a corridor. He saw nurses walking by with clipboards and orderlies pushing carts. Life in the hospital was continuing, completely unaware that a piece of Hollywood's heart was currently lying in a room just down the hall. The contrast made the waiting room feel even more isolated. The man pulled his phone out of his pocket. He hesitated, then unlocked it. The screen was already flooded with notifications. Breaking news: Keanu Reeves rushed to hospital, Fans pray for star. The rumor mill was already churning. People on the internet were speculating. Some said it was a stunt gone wrong. Others said it was exhaustion. A few darker voices were suggesting it was drugs or a breakdown. The man felt a surge of anger. They didn't know. They saw the movies and the memes, but they didn't know the man. They didn't know how he sat with the crew at lunch. They didn't know how he remembered the name of the woman who cleaned the trailers. They were turning his pain into entertainment. "Put it away," a woman's voice said softly. It was the script supervisor. She was sitting with her knitting in her lap, though she hadn't made a single stitch since they arrived. "Reading that stuff won't change anything. It will just make you mad." The man nodded and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "You're right, I hate that they are talking about him like he's already a headline." "He's not a headline," she said firmly. "He's our friend, and he's going to be fine." "He has to be." The silence returned, but it was a little less heavy now. They had shared their fear, and in sharing it, it had become slightly more manageable. They were in this together. Time dragged on. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, a constant, low-frequency hum that was starting to give everyone a headache. The young assistant wiped her face with a tissue. "Do you think he knows we're here?" "I'm sure he does," the coordinator said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "He knows we've got his back. Just like he's always had ours." He remembered a time years ago on a different film when the coordinator had hurt his back. It wasn't a major injury to the production, just a personal pain. But Keanu had noticed. He had stopped filming, called for a break, and personally helped him to the medic tent. He didn't do it for the cameras. He did it because he cared. That was the man they were waiting for, not the action hero, the human being. Suddenly, the double doors at the end of the hallway swung open. A doctor walked out. He was wearing a long white coat and holding a thick file. He looked tired, his eyes slightly rimmed with red, but his expression was serious. The group stood up in unison. The rustle of clothes and the squeak of shoes against the floor was loud in the quiet hall. The coordinator stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the moment. The truth was about to hit them. Whatever the doctor said would change everything. The doctor looked at their faces, seeing the fear and the love mixed together. He took a breath. "Are you here for Mr. Reeves?" "We're his family," the director said, stepping up beside the coordinator. "We're all he's got right now." The doctor nodded slowly. He didn't smile, but he didn't look devastated either. He held the file tight against his chest. "Come with me," he said. "We need to talk." The group exchanged glances. The young assistant grabbed the sleeve of the script supervisor. The fear was back, sharper than before. They walked toward the doctor, forming a protective pack, ready to face whatever news he had. As they passed through the doors, the smell of antiseptic got stronger, and the reality of the situation settled in. They were leaving the waiting room of uncertainty and stepping into the world of hard truths. But they were doing it together. The consultation room was much smaller than the hallway, cramped with too many people and not enough air. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue, but it didn't work. It just felt cold. A computer screen glowed in the corner, casting a strange light on the doctor's face. He sat on a rolling stool, looking at a clipboard, while the group of friends squeezed onto a long leather bench against the wall. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing them in. The doctor, a man with graying hair and kind eyes that looked tired behind thick glasses, took a deep breath. He set the clipboard down on the metal desk and clasped his hands together. He didn't say anything right away, which made the silence in the room stretch out until it felt like a rubber band about to snap. The stunt coordinator was bouncing his leg nervously. The director was staring at a poster of the human heart on the wall, refusing to look at the doctor. "First," the doctor began, his voice low and steady, "I want to put your minds at ease about the immediate danger. He did not have a stroke. He did not have a heart attack. There is no brain damage." A collective exhale went through the room. It was like the air had been let out of a balloon. The young production assistant let out a quiet sob and buried her face in her hands. The director reached over and squeezed her shoulder, his own shoulders dropping 2 inches as the tension left his body. "Then, what was it?" the director asked, his voice raspy. "Why did he just collapse like that? I've seen him do stunts that would kill a normal person. Why did he fall over standing still?" The doctor turned his computer screen around so they could see it. It was filled with graphs and numbers that didn't make much sense to the film crew, but the red lines looked ominous. He collapsed because his body simply quit, the doctor explained. He is severely dehydrated. His electrolyte levels, sodium, potassium, magnesium, are critically low. Basically, his battery was at 0%. When he tried to move, his muscles had nothing left to give. But we have water on set, the stunt coordinator argued, his brow furrowed. We make sure he drinks. He's a professional. He knows better than to get dehydrated. I know he does, the doctor said, nodding slowly. That is what makes this so confusing. To reach this level of depletion, you have to be sweating heavily for days without replenishing. And look at this. He pointed to a different chart on the screen, an X-ray image of a spine. See this compression and the inflammation in the joints? His body is under an immense amount of physical stress. It looks like the wear and tear of someone who is lifting heavy weights or performing high-impact cardio for 8 hours a day. The crew members looked at each other, confused. But we haven't been filming heavy stunts, the director said, scratching his head. This week was mostly dialogue, sitting and talking, maybe a little walking. He hasn't thrown a punch or jumped off anything in 10 days. The doctor leaned back, crossing his arms. That is the part that doesn't add up. If you look at his muscles, they are torn and fatigued as if he's been in a fight ring. If you look at his hydration, it's like he's been running a marathon in the desert. But you say he's been sitting in a chair reading lines. Yes, the director said firmly. I was there, I watched him every minute. He went home, he came back. He looked tired, sure, but not like this. The doctor looked down at his notes, a frown creasing his forehead. I've been a doctor for 20 years, he said quietly. I can tell when someone is overworked because of their job, but this feels different. This level of exhaustion usually comes from a second job, a secret life. He is burning the candle at both ends and the middle too. The room went quiet again. The thoughts settled over them like a dark cloud. A second job, a secret life. It didn't sound like the man they knew. Keanu was simple. He rode his motorcycle, he read books, he worked. Where would he find the energy to do something else that was physically destroying him? Is he going to be okay? The script supervisor asked, breaking the silence. If we get him to rest, will he heal? He needs rest, the doctor agreed. But he also needs fluids and nutrition. We are pumping him full of saline right now. He's sleeping. The exhaustion is so deep that his body has basically forced a shutdown. It's a safety mechanism. But, he paused, looking each of them in the eye, you can't just fix this with sleep. If he goes back to whatever he is doing that is causing this, it will happen again. And next time, his heart might not be strong enough to take the strain. The director stood up and walked to the small window that looked out into the hallway. He felt a knot of guilt forming in his stomach. He thought about the last few weeks. He remembered Keanu showing up with circles under his eyes. He remembered him yawning between takes, always apologizing, always saying he was fine. The director had bought it. He had assumed it was just the long hours of the production. He had never asked, "Are you okay? Really okay?" He didn't say anything, the director whispered mostly to himself. He just kept going. Men like him often do, the doctor said softly. They carry the weight so others don't have to, but eventually the back breaks. Just then the door to the room opened. A nurse popped her head in. She looked hesitant. "Excuse me." His personal assistant is here. He says he has something that might explain the test results. He says it's important. The group turned toward the door. The personal assistant, a young man who looked frantic and disheveled, stepped inside. He was holding a tablet computer in his hand, gripping it so hard his knuckles were white. He was out of breath like he had run all the way from the studio. "I'm sorry I'm late," he panted. "I had to get this. I tried to call, but I couldn't get through." "What is it?" the director asked, walking over to him. The assistant looked at the doctor, then at the crew. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking. "You're asking why he's so tired. You're looking at the medical charts and saying they don't make sense. But they do make sense if you know where he goes at night." He tapped the screen of the tablet, waking it up. He held it out to the doctor. The room felt charged with electricity, the mystery hanging by a thread. The doctor took the tablet, squinting at the screen. The rest of the group leaned in, holding their breath. They were about to find out the truth. The rumor mill outside was spinning stories of parties and scandals. But the people in this small, blue room knew that the truth was going to be something else entirely. It was going to be something only Keanu would do. The doctor's eyes widened as he scrolled. He looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. This, the doctor said, is not a movie schedule. The light from the tablet screen reflected in the doctor's glasses, hiding his eyes for a moment as he scrolled down the page. The silence in the small room was absolute. No one dared to breathe. The director leaned in closer, trying to make sense of the digital text and the blurry photos that accompanied it. "This isn't a movie schedule," the doctor said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked up, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "This is a shift log. It goes back for months." The assistant, who was standing by the door with his shoulders slumped, finally spoke up. "He made me promise not to tell anyone. He said he could handle it. But when he passed out today, I couldn't keep the secret anymore. You have to understand why his body is giving up." "Show us," the stunt coordinator said, his voice rough. He reached out and took the tablet gently from the doctor. He tapped the screen and turned it around so everyone could see. It was a simple spreadsheet, but the entries were heartbreakingly detailed. Dates were listed in the first column, followed by times. Most of the entries started at 7:00 p.m. and ended at 4:00 a.m. "Look at the location," the assistant said, pointing a shaking finger. "It's not a gym, it's not a club, it's the Sunset Haven Hospice Center." The stunt coordinator's eyes widened. He recognized the name. It was a facility for people who had no one else, a place where people went to spend their final days when they couldn't afford better care or didn't have family to look after them. "Why?" the script supervisor asked, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Why would he go there after working all day?" "Because of who is in room 304, the assistant said softly. The coordinator scrolled down to the notes section. There were daily logs: lifted patient from bed to chair, assisted with walking, read books for 3 hours, change dressings. Held hand during pain spikes. The room felt like the floor had dropped out from under them. The physical demands described in the logs were intense. Lifting a dead weight of a grown man is not easy. Doing it for hours night after night while smiling and comforting them is exhausting. "Room 304, the coordinator breathed out. That's where he is," the assistant nodded. "His name is David. He was a stuntman in the 90s. He worked on a few of the same early films as Keanu. They weren't close friends back then, just acquaintances who shared a smoke between takes. But David had a hard life. He got injured, lost his insurance, and has no family. His health went downhill fast. When Keanu found out, he visited him once. Then he went back the next day. And the next." The doctor looked at the medical chart again, connecting the dots in his mind. "The muscle strain," he muttered. "The dehydration. He's been performing heavy lifting and nursing duties all night, then coming to your set to perform stunts during the day. He hasn't slept more than 4 hours a night in 6 months." The director sat down heavily on the stool. He felt sick. He remembered yelling at Keanu last week for being slow to get up from a kneeling position. He had rolled his eyes and thought the actor was being difficult. Now he realized that Keanu's knees were probably aching from lifting his friend out of bed just a few hours before. "He didn't want anyone to know," the assistant continued. "He paid for the best room they had, but he wouldn't hire a night nurse. He said David was scared of dying alone. He said David needed a familiar face, so Keanu became that face. He would leave the set, grab a sandwich, and go sit by that bed until the sun came up. Then he'd come here, put on his costume, and pretend to be a hero." The irony hung in the air, thick and suffocating. On screen, Keanu played the savior, the man who rescued the world. But in real life, he was saving just one person in a quiet room where no cameras were allowed. And it was breaking him. The doctor stood up and walked to the small sink in the corner. He turned on the water and washed his hands, trying to process the information. "This explains the electrolyte imbalance," he said over the sound of the running water. "He's been burning energy at a rate that is impossible to sustain, and the emotional stress. Being with someone who is dying takes a toll on the heart, too. It's called broken heart syndrome in some cases, but here it's just pure exhaustion of the spirit." "He never complained," the young production assistant whispered. She was looking at her hands. "I complained about my feet hurting. I complained about the long hours. He never said a word." The stunt coordinator handed the tablet back. His face looked older now, etched with a mix of pride and incredible sadness. That's just him, though. He doesn't do it for the glory. If the press found out, they'd turn it into a circus. They'd be camping out at the hospice. He didn't want that for David. He just wanted his friend to have some dignity at the end. The room fell silent again, but this time the fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of awe. They were worried about a movie star collapsing, but the reality was so much deeper. This wasn't a story about a celebrity breaking down. It was a story about a human being giving everything he had, until there was nothing left to give. "We have to help him," the director said, standing up. His voice was stronger now. "If he goes back there tonight, he's going to die. We can't let him do that. He won't want to stop," the assistant warned. "David doesn't have much time left, days maybe. Keanu won't leave him." "Then we help him," the stunt coordinator said firmly. "But we don't take him away from his friend, we support him. We get him the rest he needs, but we make sure he knows he doesn't have to carry it alone anymore." The doctor turned off the water and dried his hands on a rough paper towel. He looked at the group of people who had started the day as just a film crew, but were now bound together by this secret. "He is stable for now," the doctor said. "But when he wakes up, you have to tell him you know. He needs to know that the burden is shared. Secrets like this are too heavy for one person to carry, even for him." They all nodded in agreement. The rumor mill outside was still spinning, likely inventing stories about overdoses or breakdowns. But inside this small, blue room, the truth was finally out. It wasn't a scandal. It was an act of love so pure that it had nearly destroyed him. And as they prepared to go back into the hallway to wait for him to wake up, they knew that their job had changed. They weren't just making a movie anymore. They were going to protect the man who had tried to protect everyone else. The first thing Keanu noticed was the light. It was an aggressive, artificial white that pressed against his eyelids, demanding he wake up. He tried to move, but his body felt like it was made of lead, heavy and uncooperative. There was a steady beeping sound nearby, rhythmic and annoying. A dry, bitter taste coated his mouth, and his throat felt like sandpaper. He groaned, a low sound that barely escaped his lips. Instantly, a face appeared above him. It was the stunt coordinator, looking rougher than usual. His eyes were red, and his beard looked like he hadn't combed it in days. Behind him, the director and the young production assistant leaned in, their expressions a mix of relief and anxiety. "Hey," the coordinator said softly. "You're back with us?" Keanu blinked, trying to focus. His memory was a blur of concrete floors and fading sounds. "What happened?" he rasped. His voice was weak, a shadow of its usual self. "You passed out," the director said, stepping closer to the bed. He reached out and patted Keanu's hand. "You scared the life out of us, kid." Keanu tried to sit up, panic suddenly flashing in his eyes. "The scene. Did we finish the sequence? I need to get back. I'm fine, really. Just a little dizzy." The doctor, who had been standing quietly in the corner writing on a chart, walked over and gently pushed Keanu back onto the pillows. "You are not fine," the doctor said firmly but kindly. "And you are not going back to work today or tomorrow. Your body ran out of energy, Mr. Reeves. You are running on fumes." Keanu looked down at his hands, which were resting on top of the crisp white sheets. He looked embarrassed. He hated causing trouble. He hated being the reason why production stopped. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I've just been tired lately. I'll sleep more." "I promise." The coordinator looked at the director, then at the assistant. They all shared a look that said asterisk, now is the time asterisk. The coordinator pulled a chair up close to the bed and sat down so he was eye level with Keanu. "We know why you're tired," the coordinator said. Keanu froze. He didn't look up. He kept his eyes on his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "We know about David," the coordinator added gently. Keanu's head snapped up. His eyes were wide, filled with a sudden vulnerability. "How?" "Your assistant showed us the logs," the director said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded impressed and incredibly sad. "We know about the hospice. We know you've been lifting him, sitting with him all night. We know." The room went quiet. The beeping of the monitor seemed to get louder. Keanu looked away, staring at the blank wall on the other side of the room. His jaw tightened. "I didn't want anyone to know," he mumbled. "He has nobody else if I don't go." "Who holds his hand?" The stunt coordinator let out a long breath and shook his head. You're an idiot, Keanu. A heroic, beautiful idiot. It's true, the young assistant chimed in from the foot of the bed. She was smiling through her tears. You're killing yourself to help someone else, but you won't let us help you. Keanu finally looked at them. He saw the worry in their eyes, but he also saw something else. Respect. They weren't judging him. They weren't annoyed that he was late or tired. They were just looking at him with love. I didn't want to fuss, Keanu said, his voice cracking slightly. It's not a big deal. He's my friend. He was there for me a long time ago. It's what you do. It is a big deal, the director said, his voice serious. You collapse in the middle of a floor because you've been working 2 jobs, one of them being a nurse, and you say it's not a big deal. You can't carry the whole world on your shoulders, Keanu. Even Atlas needed a break. Keanu leaned back against the pillows, the fight draining out of him. He closed his eyes for a moment, a single tear escaping and running down his temple into his hair. I'm just so tired, he admitted, finally letting his guard down. He's in so much pain, and I can't fix it. I can't make him better. I can just be there. And you have been, the coordinator said, reaching out and gripping Keanu's forearm. You've been there more than anyone. But you can't help him if you end up in a bed next to him. You're no good to him dead. The doctor cleared his throat. He's right. Physically, you cannot sustain this. But the doctor paused, looking at the group. I also know that telling you to stop won't work, so we are going to make a deal. Keanu opened his eyes. What kind of deal? You stay here tonight, the doctor said. You sleep, you let these fluids do their work, and starting tomorrow, your crew here has agreed to set up a rotation. If you want to be with David at night, fine. But you aren't doing the heavy lifting anymore. We will hire a professional nurse to do the physical stuff. You just sit there and talk to him. That is all. Keanu opened his mouth to argue, but the director held up a hand. Don't argue, it's already done. We pooled the money, we hired the nurse, she starts tonight. You are going to rest, and then you are going to go visit your friend as a guest, not as a nurse. Keanu looked from one face to another. He saw the determination in their eyes. He realized that he wasn't alone. He had been trying to protect David by keeping it a secret, but in doing so, he had denied himself the support of the people who cared about him. He let out a long, shaky breath, and for the first time all day, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. You guys are bossy, he said, his voice a little stronger. We're your family, the coordinator shot back. That's the job description. The tension in the room, which had been coiled tight like a spring for hours, finally released. It dissolved into the air, replaced by a warmth that the hospital's air conditioning couldn't touch. They laughed softly, the sound echoing off the sterile walls. It was a tired laugh, but a real one. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began to dip lower in the sky outside the window. The light in the room changed from harsh white to a soft, golden orange. It bathed the faces of the crew in a warm glow, making the scene feel less like a hospital and more like a living room. The group sat around the bed for a while longer, swapping stories and teasing each other, trying to keep the mood light. They didn't talk about movies or stunts anymore. They talked about life, about old times, and about how good it was going to feel to get back to work once their leader was on his feet again. Eventually, the doctor came in and shooed them out, insisting that the patient needed actual sleep. As they filed out of the room, the coordinator lingered for a second in the doorway. Get some sleep, man, he said. I will, Keanu replied. Thanks, the coordinator nodded and stepped out, leaving the door slightly ajar. Keanu lay in the quiet room, watching the dust motes dance in the last rays of the sunset. He thought about David. He thought about the nurse who would be there tonight to lift him, to change his sheets, to do the hard work. For the first time in months, he didn't feel the crushing weight of responsibility on his chest. He could just be a friend. He closed his eyes, listening to the steady beep of the monitor. It was a rhythm of life, of a heart that was still beating, a body that was healing. The world outside was still spinning, still making up stories and rumors, but in here everything was okay. He was safe, he was loved, and tomorrow he would wake up ready to fight again, not just for the cameras, but for the people who mattered most. The truth had shocked them all, but it had also brought them closer together. And in the end, that was the only thing that really mattered.